I'm Gary Venner, CEO of IFA Acquisitions, and I'm joined by Gemma Irvine, who's the HR lead and director of HR People Support, who run trusted outsourced HR partner support, where we continue our informative question and answer series on our YouTube channel to provide insights into helping buyers and sellers understand the benefits of using HR specialists for the buying and selling of IFA businesses for sound HR advice. The title of the next video is coming up on the screen now. So Gemma, around acquisitions, they tend to really require a lot of confidentiality. And so when do you feel is the sort of best time to actually talk to staff about a potential acquisition of their business?
So when you're looking at an acquisition, obviously you have to go through all of the process, and the main consideration is around kind of the staff and when that kicks in. Really, you want to be talking to them with as much notice as possible, but that's going to kind of depend on the size of the business and how much time you have and what's considered reasonable. From a confidentiality perspective, you want to be making sure that you've got confidentiality clauses in your contracts,
right,
and relying on that. In the absence of those clauses, you might want to consider NDAs, to protect both the seller and the acquirer. But generally speaking, the confidentiality clauses in their original contracts of employment should do enough to protect.
And if they're not actually in the contract, would you say there's sort of an implied in employment law that staff should retain that information confidentially?
Again, it depends on your policies and your processes and what you already have in place. If you have a confidentiality policy that might not be in your contracts, you might be able to rely on that in an implied position. But generally speaking, you should have.
That'd be safe, really.
Absolutely.
So if it's not there, perhaps get those NDAs put in place. It does make sense, and I think it's really also because of protection, I suppose, from any leaks to clients or to competitors. You know, that it's one of those times when you least want to lose any clients through that process, and they feel a little bit aggrieved if they weren't in on that
Absolutely.
knowledge, isn't it?
Yeah, I would always suggest as you go through the consultation process to remind employees, well, we're going through this process, this is a confidential process, and then making sure that you're reiterating those positions. And
I guess the benefit of doing all this is the staff do feel involved at that point as well.
Absolutely.
So Gemma, TUPE is mentioned when businesses are acquiring other businesses. What is TUPE?
TUPE is the Transfer of Undertakings Protection of Employment legislation. So it is in place to protect employees around mergers, acquisitions, takeovers, so that their employment rights are protected during those processes. Under TUPE, you have a number of obligations that both the incoming employer and the outgoing employer have to meet, around informing and consulting and providing information. So there's a lot of kind of legal requirements that you have to meet under TUPE to protect those employees.
So how should you inform staff of the potential takeover under those TUPE rules, and what stage does that need to happen?
So from an information perspective, the first step is really the employee liability information. So there's a kind of a time frame for providing employee liability information. Sometimes it's referred to as ELI, and that information has to be provided to the incoming employer at least 28 days before any relevant transfer date. That information is providing information about employees, about their their length of service, any kind of sick leave, any potential discriminatory claims, any grievance claims. So that kind of ELI is really important in terms of the start of the process, really to understand the risks that the incoming employer is going to take on, because once the transfer has happened, they take on all of those liabilities for all of those staff. So that's the kind of the first step, really. The next stage is kind of making sure that the outgoing employer meets the informing obligation in terms of letting staff know that this is going to happen. Right. And obviously that's part of the conversation in terms of with the incoming and the outgoing employer in terms of when that is best to take place.
And how does that take place? Is that normally verbally or in a meeting, or is it by letter, or both?
So the kind of the obligations under TUPE is that you have an obligation to inform through employee representatives. So you might have to go through an election process to elect employee representatives.
Is this where there's a certain number of employees in a business?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's where there's kind of usually over 10 employees that are affected. Yeah. Under that, the obligation is mitigated. However, you still have the obligation to inform them, so that might be directly in terms of meeting with them individually. So you have to go through that election process to elect the representatives. You then inform through those representatives in terms of providing information about what the transfer looks like, when it might happen, why it's happening, that kind of information, and that leads you into a consultation process. That the start of that might be a company announcement, it might be a company-wide email. It really depends on the culture of the business, how big the business is, and how they usually inform staff of company changes. What you don't want to be doing is kind of doing something out of the ordinary, which potentially implies kind of mistrust or kind of makes the employees concerned about the process. So you don't want to do anything to kind of concern or unsettle staff, but it's really kind of depends on the employer themselves.
Yeah, I can understand that, and like you say, it is the unsettling of staff. That's the concern, isn't it? So this consultation process is presumably to sort of make sure that it answers all those questions that the staff may have.
Absolutely, yeah. And in order to kind of invite to consultation, you will have a series of letters and things that you will need to kind of inform them individually of, and there are certain kind of obligations that you need to include within those, such as measures which are kind of the changes that are instrumental in terms of the takeover. So you've got a number of different ways of ensuring that consultation takes place.
Okay, that's good. And so do staff have a say? You know, what if they said, we don't want to be taken over, we don't agree with this process? What say do they have?
So as I said, they will have employee representatives that they can then discuss with the changes and the kind of what's going on. So they will be able to feed into those representatives to then feed back to the incoming employer. Those representations might include things that the employer might not be aware of. They might be able to make suggestions around kind of the changes, maybe alternatives to avoiding potential redundancies if that's something that's been envisaged. And really it's often can be beneficial from an incoming employer to understand what's going on the front line, kind of what does the product offering look like, what does the client service look like, how is that going to be affected by these potential changes. So it's really important that employees do have a say, and the incoming employer will need to consider and respond to those. However, it's up to them as to whether they take those on board.